Hey, welcome back to Late Night Psychology. Get comfortable, adjust your pillow, pull up the blanket if you need one. There's no rush here, nowhere you need to be. Nothing you need to do except relax and let your mind wander. Tonight, we're going to explore something that most people think could never happen to them. Cults. When we hear that word, we usually imagine something obvious. Wild-eyed fanatics, robes and chanting. People who must have been crazy or stupid to begin with. But that's not how it works. That's almost never how it works. The people who join cults are for the most part normal, intelligent, educated, looking for something meaningful in their lives. And that's what makes this topic so unsettling. Because if cults only recruited crazy people, we could all relax. We could tell ourselves it would never happen to us. But the research tells a different story. Under the right circumstances, with the right techniques, almost anyone can be drawn in. Tonight, we're going to understand how. We'll look at the psychology of influence, the step-by-step process that takes someone from curious newcomer to true believer. The techniques that cult leaders use, often instinctively, to gain control over minds. And we'll explore 3 patterns. The first is the mechanics of influence. How do you get someone to give up their money, their relationships, their autonomy? How do small commitments become total surrender? We'll look at the psychological principles that make this possible, principles that work on almost everyone. The second is modern cult control. How do these groups operate in plain sight? How do they recruit successful professionals, doctors, lawyers, executives, without anyone noticing? We'll examine how the cult model has evolved, how it now wears the disguise of self-improvement. The third is apocalyptic belief. What happens when a leader claims to speak for God? When the end of the world becomes the organizing principle of a community? When prophecy creates its own reality? 3 patterns, 3 case studies, 3 windows into how the cult mind works. So settle in, let your breathing slow down, and let's begin. Before we get into specific cases, we need to understand something fundamental. How does influence work? Not just cult influence, any influence. How do people get other people to do things? In the 1980s, a psychologist named Robert Cialdini spent years studying this question. He went undercover. He trained as a car salesman, a fundraiser, a telemarketer. He wanted to understand the techniques that professionals use to get people to say yes. What he found became one of the most important books in social psychology. But here's what makes Cialdini's research fascinating. He didn't just study influence from a distance. He didn't just run experiments in a lab. He went undercover. For 3 years, Cialdini infiltrated the world of professional persuaders. He trained as a car salesman, learned the scripts, the techniques, the tricks they used to get you to sign. He worked as a telemarketer, calling strangers and convincing them to buy things they didn't need. He joined fundraising, organizations, door-to-door sales teams, advertising agencies. He wanted to understand influence from the inside. And what he discovered was that the same techniques appeared everywhere. Whether you're selling cars or collecting donations or recruiting for a religion, the underlying psychology is identical. The human mind has certain vulnerabilities, certain patterns, and if you know how to exploit them, you can get people to do almost anything. Let me tell you about these patterns, not as a list, but as a story of how someone gets pulled in. Imagine you're going through a difficult time. Maybe you've just moved to a new city. Maybe you've gone through a breakup. Maybe you're searching for something. Meaning, purpose, belonging, and you're not finding it in your regular life. One day you meet someone at a coffee shop, at a bookstore, at some event you wandered into. They're friendly, warm, interested in you. They ask about your life. They listen, really listen, in a way that people rarely do anymore. They invite you to dinner with some friends. You go. And everyone is wonderful. They remember your name. They ask follow-up questions about things you mentioned. They make you feel seen. This is called love bombing. It's the first technique. Cialdini called the underlying principle reciprocity. When someone gives us something, attention, affection, gifts, we feel obligated to give something back. It's hardwired. It exists in every human culture. It's how cooperation evolved. These people have given you so much warmth, so much kindness. How can you not give something in return? So you come back, you attend another dinner, then a workshop, then a weekend retreat. Each step feels small, natural, a logical extension of the last. This is Cialdini's second pattern, commitment and consistency. Once we've said yes to something small, we feel pressure to stay consistent, to keep saying yes. Car salesmen know this. They start with tiny agreements. You do want a reliable car, right? Yes. Safety matters to you? Yes. Quality is important? Yes. Each small yes builds toward the big yes. Cults work exactly the same way. Come to one meeting, just see what it's about. Then volunteer a few hours a week, then move into the community. Then give us your savings. By the time you realize how deep you're in, you've already sacrificed so much, your time, your money, your relationships. And admitting you made a mistake would mean all those sacrifices were for nothing. So you stay, and you commit more deeply. Now you're spending most of your time with the group. Everyone around you believes the same things, uses the same language, sees the world the same way. When you express doubt, people look at you with concern, with pity, like you're the one who doesn't understand. When you conform, you're praised, welcomed, loved. This is social proof. Cialdini's third pattern. We look to others to determine what's others to determine. True, if everyone around us believes something, we assume it must be correct. If everyone is doing something, it must be right. Inside the group's reality becomes your reality. You stop thinking for yourself, you start thinking what the group thinks, and it doesn't feel like pressure, it feels like truth. At the center of all this is the leader, someone who claims special knowledge, divine revelation, unique insight into how the world really works. They speak with absolute confidence. They have answers for everything. They've been where you are, and they've found the way out. This is authority, Cialdini's fourth pattern. We defer to experts, to people who seem to know what they're doing. And once you accept the leader's authority, once you believe they understand things you don't, you stop questioning, because who are you to doubt them? They have the knowledge, the connection to God, the secret truth. You're just a seeker, still learning, still growing. Your doubts aren't wisdom, they're weakness. And remember those people who first welcomed you? They're still there, still warm, still kind. They become your closest friends, your family really. You like them, you trust them. This is Cialdini's fifth pattern, liking. We're influenced by people we like. We trust them, we follow their lead. Cult recruiters are trained to be likable, to find common ground, to mirror your interests, your hopes, your fears. They become your friends before they become your recruiters. And once they're your friends, once you genuinely care about them, you follow them into places you'd never go alone. And finally, there's the hook that keeps you from looking elsewhere. What you found here is special, rare, unavailable anywhere else. The outside world doesn't have this knowledge, these techniques, this community, and time is running out. The apocalypse is coming, the opportunity won't last, the door's closing, you have to commit now. This is scarcity, Cialdini's sixth pattern. We want what's rare, what's exclusive, what might not be available tomorrow. The pressure prevents careful thinking, it pushes you toward impulsive decisions, and by the time you might have reconsidered, you're already inside. This is how it works, not through brainwashing, not through magic, not through techniques that only work on stupid people, through normal psychology, the same psychology that makes you buy a car you can't afford, that makes you donate to a charity after receiving a free address label, that makes you stay in a job you hate because you've already invested so many years. Cult leaders, often instinctively, exploit these patterns. They create environments where every psychological lever is being pulled at once. Reciprocity, commitment, social proof, authority, liking, scarcity, all of them, all the time. And under that kind of pressure, almost anyone can be captured. Now, let's see how all of this worked. In practice, in 1955, a young preacher in Indianapolis founded a new church. Jim Jones was born in 1931 in rural Indiana. His childhood was difficult. His father was a Klan sympathizer. His mother worked long hours to support the family. By many accounts, young Jim was isolated, strange, preoccupied with death and religion. But he was also charismatic. Even as a child, he could gather other kids around him. He would hold funerals for dead animals, preaching sermons over their bodies. He had a gift for holding attention. As he grew older, he found his calling, the church. but not the traditional church. Jones saw himself as something different, a prophet, a socialist, a healer. In 1955, he founded what would become the People's Temple in Indianapolis. And from the very beginning, he did something unusual for the time. He welcomed everyone. This was the 1950s. The civil rights movement was just beginning. America was deeply segregated, and here was Jim Jones preaching racial integration, black members and white members sitting together, worshiping together, treated as equals. This was radical. It was dangerous in some parts of the country, and it attracted people who felt marginalized by mainstream society. African Americans who had experienced a lifetime of discrimination, idealists who believed in equality, young people disillusioned with the status quo. Jones gave them a community. He gave them a vision of a better world. He gave them belonging. Let's pause and recognize something important. The early People's Temple did real good. They ran drug rehabilitation programs. They opened soup kitchens. They helped the elderly. They advocated for civil rights. Many members joined because they genuinely wanted to help people. And for a while, they did. This is crucial to understanding cults. They don't start evil. They start by offering something real, something valuable. The descent into darkness is gradual. Jones had another ability that cemented his authority. He performed miracles. During services, he would call out people he had never met. He would tell them their addresses, their medical conditions, their secret fears. I see a woman in the third row. You have a tumor. You've been afraid to go to the doctor. Come up here. The woman would come forward, shocked. How did he know? Jones would pray over her. He would pass his hands over her body, and then he would pull out a tumor, bloody tissue that he seemed to have drawn from her body. The congregation would erupt in praise. A miracle, a genuine healing. It was all fake. Jones had teams of people who researched congregation members beforehand. They went through garbage. They talked to neighbors. They gathered information. The tumors were chicken livers, hidden in advance and revealed at the right moment. It was theater, carefully staged manipulation. But the people watching didn't know that. They saw a man who could see into their souls, who could heal with a touch. They believed he was special. And that belief was the first step of their entrapment. As the People's Temple grew, Jones demanded more from his followers. He required members to donate a percentage of their income. First 10%, then 25%, then everything. He required members to sell their homes and give the proceeds to the church. He required members to move into communal housing controlled by the temple. Each step made members more dependent on the organization. If you've given your house, your savings, your income to the temple, where would you go if you left? You'd have nothing. You're trapped, economically, socially, psychologically. And that's exactly where Jones wanted you. In the early 1970s, Jones began talking about moving. He said the United States was corrupt, doomed, that nuclear war was coming. He had found a place, he said, a promised land, a socialist paradise where they could build a new society. Jonestown. It was in Guyana, a small country on the northern coast of South America. Jungle, remote, thousands of miles from anywhere. The first settlers arrived in 1974. They started clearing land, building structures, creating what Jones called the People's Temple Agricultural Project. Over the next few years, more and more members relocated. By 1977, almost 1,000 people lived in Jonestown. They had left everything behind, their homes, their families, their country. They were completely isolated, completely dependent, completely under Jones's control. Let's talk about what life was like in Jonestown, because this is where the control became total. Members worked 6 days a week, 11 hours a day, in brutal tropical heat. Food was limited, rice and beans mostly. Members were often hungry. But Jones ate well. He had a private refrigerator. The double standard was obvious, but no one could say anything. Because Jones had created a system where speaking up was impossible. There was a culture of surveillance. Everyone was encouraged to report on everyone else. If you heard someone express doubt, you were supposed to tell the leadership. Children were encouraged to report on their parents. Spouses reported on each other. No one could trust anyone. And that isolation, that destruction of private trust, was deliberate. It meant that members could never organize against Jones. It meant that everyone felt alone. It meant that Jones was the only one anyone could rely on. There were public punishments. If someone broke the rules or was accused of breaking the rules, they were brought before the community. They were humiliated, forced to confess, sometimes beaten, sometimes placed in a wooden box called the box, a coffin-like structure where rule breakers were imprisoned for days. Children were lowered into a well at night and told there were monsters waiting for them. Fear was constant, and fear keeps people obedient, but perhaps the most disturbing practice was the white nights. Jones would call emergency meetings in the middle of the night. He would tell members that enemies were coming, that the CIA was attacking, that they were all going to die. He would have them drink from a vat of liquid and then tell them they had just been poisoned. They would wait to die. Some would cry, some would pray, and then nothing would happen. Jones would tell them it was a test, a loyalty drill. This happened over and over again. The effect was profound. Members became desensitized to the idea of death. They practiced dying. They accepted it as inevitable. When the real moment came, they had already rehearsed it. In November 1978, a U.S. congressman named Leo Ryan flew to Guyana. He had received reports from concerned family members, stories of abuse, claims that people were being held against their will. Ryan wanted to see for himself. On November 17th, he arrived at Jonestown with a delegation of journalists and relatives. Jones was charming at first. He showed them around. He arranged entertainment. But some members approached the delegation secretly. They wanted to leave. This was a crisis for Jones. If people left, they would talk. They would expose what was really happening. His control would crumble. On November 18th, as Ryan's group was leaving from a nearby airstrip, they were ambushed. Jones had sent armed men. Congressman Ryan was killed. 3 journalists were killed. 1 defector was killed. Others were wounded. Back in Jonestown, Jones called an emergency meeting. This was no drill. What happened next is recorded on audio tape. Jones told his followers that the congressman's death meant retaliation would come, that soldiers would arrive, that they would torture the children, that there was no escape. He presented death as an act of revolutionary protest, a final statement against a corrupt world. "We didn't commit suicide," he said. "We committed an act of revolutionary suicide, protesting the conditions of an inhumane world." A vat of grape flavor aid was prepared, mixed with cyanide and sedatives. Parents gave it to their children first, then drank it themselves. Some resisted. They were held down and injected. 918 people died that day. 1/3 of them were children. How do we make sense of this? How did over 900 people die following a man who was, by that point, clearly paranoid, drug-addicted, and delusional? The answer is, it didn't happen in a day. It happened step by step. Small commitments that became large ones, gradual isolation that became total, love bombing that became dependency, authority that became absolute. Each step seemed reasonable at the time. Each step built on the last. By the time they were in that jungle, with no money, no resources, no outside connections, no one they could trust, what options did they have? They were trapped, physically, economically, socially, psychologically. And they had practiced dying. They had rehearsed this moment dozens of times. When it came for real, their resistance had already been broken. Jim Jones didn't start as a monster, or maybe he did and just hid it well. But the People's Temple didn't start as a death cult. It started as a church, a community, a place where people found belonging and purpose. The descent was gradual, and that's the lesson. Cults don't announce themselves. They don't say, "Join us and drink poison in the jungle." They say, "Join us and change the world." The poison comes later, one step at a time. Take a breath. Let that settle. That was heavy material. Our next case is different, more recent, more sophisticated, a cult that operated not in the jungle but in American suburbs, that recruited not idealistic activists but successful professionals, a cult that dressed itself in the language of self-improvement. NXIVM. When you're ready, we'll continue. Let's talk about a different kind of control. In the 1990s, a psychologist named Stephen Hassan developed something called the BITE model. Hassan was a former cult member himself. He had been part of the Unification Church, the Moonies, in the Nolngamwar in the 1970s. After leaving, he dedicated his career to understanding how cults work. The BITE model describes 4 domains of control that cults typically use. B is for behavior control, I is for information control, T is for thought control, E is for emotional control. Let's go through each one. Behavior control is about regulating what members do, their sleep schedules, their diets, their clothing, their finances, their sexual relationships. When an organization controls your daily behavior, they control your life. You become dependent on them for basic decisions. And controlled behavior leads to controlled thoughts. If you're sleep deprived and overworked, you don't have the mental energy to question anything. Information control is about regulating what members know. Cults typically discourage outside information. Critical books are forbidden. Internet access may be limited. Contact with former members is prohibited. At the same time, they flood members with their own materials. Constant lectures, mandatory study sessions, repetitive messaging. If you only hear one perspective, that perspective becomes your reality. Thought control is about regulating what members think. This includes loading the language, using specialized terminology that shapes how members understand the world. It includes thought-stopping techniques, prayers, chants, or phrases that members are taught to use whenever they have doubts. It includes a black and white worldview, us versus them, good versus evil, the enlightened versus the ignorant. When your language changes, your thinking changes, and when everyone around you uses the same language, the new thinking becomes automatic. Emotional control is about regulating what members feel. Cults manipulate emotions systematically. They create guilt. You're never doing enough. You're failing the group. You're disappointing the leader. They create fear. The outside world is dangerous. Leaving means disaster. Critics are enemies. They create dependency. The leader loves you. The group is your family. Without them, you're nothing. Emotional control keeps people loyal even when they have doubts, because the fear of leaving is greater than the discomfort of staying. Now, let's see how the BITE model works in practice. In 1998, a man in upstate New York founded a company offering executive success programs, high-end self-improvement training, personal development courses for ambitious professionals. It looked legitimate. It looked respectable. It wasn't. The man's name was Keith Raniere. The company was called NXIVM. But to understand NXIVM, you need to understand Raniere. He was born in 1960 in Brooklyn, New York. From an early age, he showed certain traits, high intelligence by most accounts, but also something else, an obsession with control, with admiration, with being seen as exceptional. He claimed an IQ of 240, which would make him the smartest person in recorded history. There's no evidence this is true. He claimed to be a concert-level pianist, a judo champion, a skilled inventor. Many of these claims were exaggerated or fabricated, but he believed them, or at least he presented them convincingly, and people believed him. Before NXIVM, Raniere had run another company called Consumers Byline. It was essentially a multi-level marketing scheme, a pyramid structure where most participants lost money. Multiple state attorneys general investigated. The company eventually collapsed under legal pressure. Raniere learned from this experience. His next venture would be structured differently. It wouldn't sell products, it would sell transformation. NXIVM was officially a company offering executive success programs. Think of it as high-end self-improvement training, personal development courses for ambitious professionals. The programs used a technique called rational inquiry, a method that supposedly helped people overcome their psychological limitations. It was expensive. A 5-day introductory course cost around $3,000. Advanced courses cost much more. And the people who took these courses were, by and large, successful. Doctors, lawyers, business executives, actors. These weren't marginal people looking for something to believe in. These were accomplished professionals looking for an edge. Here's the thing about the early NXIVM experience. It worked, or seemed to. People reported genuine breakthroughs, insights about their behavior, release from limiting beliefs. The techniques weren't entirely novel. Much of it was borrowed from other therapeutic approaches: cognitive behavioral therapy, neurolinguistic programming, various self-help frameworks. But it was packaged well, presented with confidence, delivered by charismatic trainers. And when something works for you, when you feel like you've grown, you trust the source, you come back for more, you bring your friends, you become an advocate. This is an important point about modern cults. They often provide real value at first. The techniques may actually help some people. The community may genuinely be supportive. The initial experience may be positive. This is what makes them so effective. If it were all bad from the beginning, no one would join. The value creates trust, and the trust creates vulnerability. As members progressed in NXIVM, the demands increased. They were encouraged to take more courses, each one more expensive than the last. They were encouraged to recruit new members. This was called enrollment. The more people you enrolled, the higher you rose in the organization. It was a pyramid structure again. But now the product was transformation, not consumer goods. And the pyramid wasn't just financial, it was psychological. NXIVM had levels. Each level came with a colored sash, like a martial arts belt system. Each level required more commitment, more courses, more enrollment, more obedience. Moving up the levels became the goal, the measure of your growth, the proof of your dedication. And Raniere was at the top. He was called Vanguard. He was presented as the source of all the technology, the genius behind the method, the most evolved human being in the organization. Everyone else was, by definition, less enlightened than him. And to question him was to reveal your own limitations. Let's talk about how NXIVM controlled information. Members were discouraged from researching Raniere or the organization online. They were told that critical information was suppressive, that it would interfere with their growth. They were told that people who left were defectors, damaged individuals who couldn't handle the truth. Former members were shunned. Contact with them was discouraged. This created an information bubble. Inside the bubble, Raniere was a visionary genius. Outside the bubble, there were warning signs everywhere. But members never looked outside. NXIVM also controlled language. They had specialized terminology for everything. Negative emotions were called disintegrations. Psychological limitations were called EMs, short for emotional modules. Critics were suppressives. Leaving was breaking the breach. This language reshaped how members thought. If you're having doubts, that's a disintegration. It's your problem, your limitation, something to be fixed. The language turned all questioning inward. It made members responsible for their own unease. It made the organization blameless. Here's a specific technique NXIVM used, something called EM sessions. In these sessions, members would explore painful memories, childhood trauma, moments of shame. A coach would guide them through the experience using the rational inquiry method. The goal was supposedly to release the emotional charge from these memories. But here's what was really happening. Members were confessing their deepest secrets, their fears, their shames, their vulnerabilities, and all of this was reported back to leadership. It was intelligence gathering disguised as therapy. If a member ever wanted to leave, if they ever wanted to speak out, the organization had ammunition. Your secrets, your confessions, your most vulnerable moments. This is called collateral. And NXIVM would eventually take this concept to its logical extreme. In 2015, a secret subgroup formed within NXIVM. It was called DOS, Dominus Obsequious Sororium, Latin for Master of the Obedient Female Companions. It was a women-only group, organized in a pyramid structure. Each woman had a master above her and slaves below her. At the very top of the pyramid was Keith Raniere. To join DOS, women were required to provide collateral, naked photographs, damaging statements about their family members, signed letters confessing to crimes they hadn't committed. This collateral would be released, they were told, if they ever revealed DOS's existence or disobeyed their master. They were given readiness drills, assignments they had to complete immediately when messaged, no matter the time of day. They were put on calorie-restricted diets, 800 calories a day or less. Raniere liked thin women. Some were branded. Yes, branded. With a cauterizing iron, the brand was a symbol. It was presented as meaningful, a mark of commitment. But when you looked at the design, you could see letters, K and R. Keith Raniere's initials, burned into their flesh. How did accomplished, intelligent women agree to this? This is where the step-by-step nature of cult control becomes clear. These women hadn't joined DOS on day one. They had spent years in NXIVM, taking courses, climbing levels, internalizing the language and worldview. They had come to trust the system, to believe in Raniere. DOS was presented as a secret sisterhood, an advanced level of training, an opportunity to overcome your limitations through radical commitment. By the time they were asked for collateral, they had already normalized so much. They had already accepted that growth required discomfort. They had already learned to override their instincts when leadership asked them to. The branding was just one more step, one more test, one more proof of dedication. NXIVM collapsed in 2017 when several women escaped and went public. The New York Times published an expose about the branding. Former members began talking, sharing their stories, revealing what had really been happening. Raniere fled to Mexico. He was arrested in 2018. In 2019, he was convicted of racketeering, sex trafficking, and other charges. He was sentenced to 120 years in prison. What does NXIVM teach us about modern cults? Several things. First, they can look respectable. NXIVM had offices, websites, celebrity endorsements, corporate clients. It didn't look like a cult. It looked like an expensive self-improvement company. That's the camouflage. Second, they target capable people. The idea that only vulnerable losers join cults is wrong. NXIVM specifically recruited successful professionals. These people had resources, skills, networks. They were valuable, and their success made the organization seem legitimate. Third, the control is gradual. No one joined NXIVM and was immediately asked for collateral or branded. The extreme demands came only after years of conditioning. Each step prepared them for the next. By the time they reached DOS, they had already accepted so many smaller violations that one more didn't seem impossible. Fourth, information control is crucial. If NXIVM members had Googled Keith Raniere early on, they would have found the consumer byline scandal. They would have found skeptical articles. They would have found warnings. But they were told not to look, and they didn't. Take a breath. That was a lot. Modern cults are in some ways more dangerous than the old ones. They don't isolate people in jungles. They operate in cities. They have websites. They look professional. And that makes them harder to recognize, harder to escape. Our final case is different again. A cult built on apocalyptic prophecy. A leader who claimed to be the Messiah. A standoff that ended in fire. David Koresh and the Branch Davidians. When you're ready, we'll continue. There's a particular kind of cult that's especially dangerous, the apocalyptic cult. These groups believe that the end of the world is coming, that only they will be saved, that the leader has special knowledge about how and when it will happen. This belief system creates unique psychological dynamics. When the end is near, normal rules don't apply. When salvation is at stake, any sacrifice becomes justified. When the leader speaks for God, questioning is blasphemy. Let's explore how this works. Apocalyptic thinking has ancient roots. It's present in Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and many other religious traditions. The basic structure is this. The world is fallen, evil is powerful. But a great transformation is coming. The righteous will be saved, the wicked will be destroyed, and a new, perfect world will emerge. This is a compelling narrative for people who feel the current world is unjust. It provides hope, it provides meaning, it explains suffering, and it's been reinterpreted countless times throughout history. Almost every generation has had groups that believed they were living in the end times. The problem with apocalyptic belief isn't the belief itself. Lots of people believe in some form of end time scenario. They live normal lives, they don't hurt anyone. The problem is when apocalyptic belief is combined with a charismatic leader who claims special knowledge. When one person says, "I know exactly how the end will come. I am God's chosen messenger. Only through me can you be saved." That's when things get dangerous, because now the leader has absolute authority. Now questioning is forbidden. Now the leader can ask for anything and frame it as God's will. Let's talk about Leon Festinger. In 1956, he published a book called When Prophecy Fails. Festinger had studied a small apocalyptic group that believed aliens were going to destroy the Earth on a specific date. Only true believers would be rescued by flying saucers. The axiom date came. Nothing happened, no aliens, no destruction, no rescue. What happened to the group? You might expect they would abandon their beliefs. The prophecy had clearly failed. But the opposite happened. Many members became more committed. They found rationalizations. The aliens had delayed the apocalypse because of the group's faith. Their prayers had saved the world. And they began proselytizing more intensely than before. Festinger called this cognitive dissonance. When our beliefs conflict with reality, we experience discomfort. And we can resolve that discomfort in two ways. We can change our beliefs, or we can change our interpretation of reality. For deeply held beliefs, beliefs that are tied to our identity, our community, our sense of meaning, it's often easier to reinterpret reality, to find explanations that preserve the belief, to double down rather than let go. Apocalyptic cult leaders use this dynamic masterfully. They make predictions. The predictions fail, and the failure becomes a test, a purification, a sign of the member's faith. Each failed prophecy actually strengthens the group, because only the truly committed remain, and the truly committed are the most controllable. Now, let's look at a case where apocalyptic belief became deadly. In the 1930s, a splinter group broke away from the Seventh-day Adventist Church. They called themselves the Branch Davidians. Their theology was apocalyptic. They believed in the imminent return of Christ. They studied the book of Revelation intensively. They established a community near Waco, Texas, a place called Mount Carmel. By the 1980s, the group had gone through several leaders, internal conflicts, power struggles. Then a young man arrived who would change everything. His birth name was Vernon Howell. He was born in 1959 in Houston, Texas. His childhood was unstable. His mother was 15 when she had him. His father was absent. He was raised partly by his grandparents. He was dyslexic. He struggled in school. He dropped out. But he had gifts. He could memorize scripture, vast amounts of it. By 18, he claimed to have memorized both the Old and New Testaments, entire books, word for word. And he could talk. He had charisma. When he spoke, people listened. But before he became a Messiah, he wanted to be a rock star. In his 20s, he drove to Los Angeles. He wanted to be discovered, to make it in music. It didn't happen. He came back to Texas, joined the Seventh-day Adventist Church, got expelled for preaching his own interpretations. Then, in 1981, he found the Branch Davidians. Here's how he took control. The leader at the time was a woman named Lois Roden. She was in her 60s, widowed, running the community. Vernon Howell, young, charismatic, biblically fluent, caught her attention. She encouraged him to play guitar during Bible study, to teach, to preach. And according to multiple accounts, they began an affair. He claimed God had told him to father a child with her, a chosen one. Whether he believed this or was simply manipulating an older woman to gain power, we can't know for certain. But it worked. Lois recognized him as her successor. Her son, George, was furious. He had expected to inherit leadership. A power struggle erupted. George drove Vernon and his followers out at gunpoint. They lived in tents in East Texas for 2 years. Harsh conditions, true believers. Then, in 1987, Vernon came back with armed followers. There was a shootout. George was wounded. Vernon and his men were tried for attempted murder. The jury couldn't reach a verdict. He walked free. And within a year, he controlled Mount Carmel completely. In 1990, Vernon Howell legally changed his name. He chose David, after King David, and Koresh, the Hebrew name for Cyrus, the Persian king who liberated the Jews. Both are called Messiah in the Hebrew Bible. The name was a statement and declaration. He wasn't just a preacher anymore. He was divinely appointed. Let's talk about how Koresh controlled his community, because the details matter. The specific mechanisms of control. First, he controlled interpretation. He was the only one who could truly understand Scripture, the only one who could decode the book of Revelation. His Bible studies would last for hours, 8 hours, 10 hours, sometimes 12 hours at a stretch, 3 times a day. Members would sit and listen, exhausted, as Koresh wove together passages from different books, constructing his unique theology. No one else had his scriptural knowledge. No one could challenge his interpretations. And the compound had no television, limited radio, no outside information, just Koresh's voice. Hour after hour, day after day, his word became their reality. Second, he controlled sex and family. In 1989, Koresh announced what he called the New Light Doctrine. All marriages within the community were dissolved. All of them. Husbands and wives were separated. The men were required to be celibate. Only Koresh had the right to have sexual relationships with women. He claimed it was necessary for producing a new lineage, a sacred bloodline that would rule the world after the apocalypse. Think about what this means psychologically. The fundamental bond between husband and wife severed, the men emasculated, watching their former wives become Koresh's spiritual brides. Unable to object, because objecting would mean rejecting God's plan. His first wife was Rachel Jones. He married her in 1984. She was 14 years old. He was 25. Over the following years, he took more wives. According to former members, he had at least 15 to 20 spiritual wives. Some were teenagers, some were as young as 12. He fathered at least 15 children with different women and girls in the compound. But here's where it gets even darker. The children born to other fathers before the New Light doctrine were called bastards. They were taught to call their biological parents dogs. Only Koresh was father. The children who were his biological offspring were special, chosen, part of the sacred lineage. The others were lesser, discipline was severe. A wooden paddle called the helper. Children were beaten for minor infractions, spilling a glass of milk, speaking out of turn. One mother, Dana Okimoto, later described how she beat her own son, Koresh's son, until he bled. Because Koresh ordered it, because disobedience to Koresh was disobedience to God. She said afterward, "If there was one thing I could take back, I would take back the spankings." The compound itself was austere. No running water, no electricity, no heating. Members worked hard, ate simple food, slept little. And meanwhile, Koresh lived differently. He had his own refrigerator, his own comforts. The double standard was obvious, but no one could say anything. Third, he controlled their bodies through training. The children, some as young as 6 years old, were given paramilitary training. They learned to handle weapons. They knew the names of different guns, their capabilities, how to use them, because the apocalypse was coming. Because Babylon would attack, and everyone, even the children, needed to be ready to fight. And then there were the weapons. The branch Davidians stockpiled firearms, assault rifles, ammunition, grenades. They sold guns at gun shows to raise money. Koresh told them they were preparing for the final battle. The confrontation prophesied in Revelation. The government would come, the forces of Babylon, and they would be ready. In early 1993, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms received reports about the weapons at Mount Carmel. They obtained a warrant to search the compound. On February 28th, approximately 75 ATF agents approached Mount Carmel. What happened next is disputed. Shots were fired. It's unclear who shot first. A firefight erupted. 4 ATF agents were killed. 6 branch Davidians were killed. The agents retreated, and a siege began. For 51 days, the FBI surrounded Mount Carmel. 900 law enforcement agents, tanks, helicopters, the full weight of the federal government. Negotiators tried to talk Koresh out, to convince members to leave. Some did leave, mostly children and a few adults. 35 people came out during the siege, 14 adults, 21 children. But most stayed, and then there was the note. On March 5th, a 9-year-old girl named Heather Jones emerged from the compound. Pinned to her clothing was a message. It said that once all the children had been released, the adults would die. The negotiators asked Koresh about it. He denied any plans for mass suicide, but the note was there, written, pinned to a child's clothes, a warning that no one fully understood until it was too late. Koresh said he was waiting for God's instruction, waiting for the right moment. At one point, he made a deal. He would surrender if the FBI broadcast one of his sermons on national radio. They agreed. The sermon was recorded and broadcast. Millions of people heard Koresh's message. And then, he didn't come out. He said God had told him to wait, that the time wasn't right yet. The promise meant nothing. The FBI tried other tactics. They cut off electricity. They blasted loud music at all hours. Nancy Sinatra, Tibetan chants, recordings of rabbits being slaughtered. They shined bright lights at night so no one could sleep. They wanted to make conditions unbearable, to pressure Koresh into surrender. It didn't work. If anything, it confirmed Koresh's narrative. See? He could say, Babylon is attacking. Just as I prophesied, just as I told you. The harassment became proof of his prophecy. On April 19, 1993, Attorney General Janet Reno authorized the FBI to end the standoff. They used tanks to punch holes in the walls and pump in tear gas, CS gas, which burns the eyes and lungs. They believed this would force the Davidians out. For 6 hours, they pumped gas into the building. What happened next is still debated. Around noon, fire broke out. The FBI says the Davidians set it themselves. Multiple fires started simultaneously in different parts of the building. Surveillance recordings captured voices saying, "Spread the fuel." Survivors say the tear gas attack caused it, that the tanks knocked over lanterns, that the CS gas is flammable. We may never know the full truth. What we know is that the building burned. 76 people died. David Koresh was found with a bullet wound in his head, either self-inflicted or shot by a follower. 20 of his followers had also been shot. 25 of the dead were children. Some of the youngest were Koresh's own children. The sacred bloodline, the future rulers of the post-apocalyptic world, they died in the fire. With everyone else, how do we understand what happened at Waco? From Koresh's perspective, and from the perspective of his followers, everything went according to prophecy. The forces of Babylon had attacked just as predicted. The faithful had resisted, and they had died as martyrs. For true believers, the fire was not a tragedy. It was confirmation, proof that Koresh had been right all along. This is the terrifying power of apocalyptic belief. It's unfalsifiable. If the prophecy comes true, the leader was right. If the prophecy doesn't come true, it's a test of faith, or the timeline has shifted, or the interpretation needs adjustment. And if the authorities intervene, that's the prophesied persecution. There's no evidence that could disprove the belief. Everything confirms it. Were the Branch Davidians victims or perpetrators? It's complicated. They had stockpiled weapons illegally. Children were being abused. Koresh was a predator by any reasonable standard. But many of the adults who died were themselves victims. People who had been manipulated, isolated, controlled. People who genuinely believed they were following God's will. People who might have left eventually if things had been handled differently. The government's tactics during the siege almost certainly made things worse. They reinforced Koresh's narrative. They gave him proof that Babylon was attacking. They made surrender feel like betrayal. We'll never know if a different approach might have saved lives. What does Waco teach us about apocalyptic cults? First, that prophecy creates its own reality. When you believe the end is coming, when you believe you're under attack, you interpret everything through that lens, and your interpretation can make the prophecy self-fulfilling. Second, that isolation is dangerous. Mount Carmel was its own world. Koresh controlled information, interpretation, relationships, everything. There was no outside perspective that could break through. Third, that charismatic authority is almost impossible to challenge from within. When the leader claims to speak for God, when questioning is defined as sin, there's no internal mechanism for correction. The leader can demand anything, and members will comply. David Koresh was 33 when he died, the same age his followers noted as Christ at the crucifixion. Even in death, the narrative continued. Even in ashes, the belief persisted. Let yourself rest for a moment. 3 cases: Jim Jones, Keith Raniere, David Koresh, different eras, different methods, different beliefs, but the same underlying dynamics: influence, control, isolation, authority. The step-by-step dismantling of critical thinking, the gradual acceptance of the unacceptable, the transformation of normal people into true believers. So, how do cults capture minds? After everything we've explored tonight, here's what we know. It happens gradually. No one joins a cult. They join a community, a cause, a self-improvement program, a church. The cult part comes later, one small step at a time. By the time you realize what you're in, you're already deep. It happens through isolation, physical isolation, like Jonestown in the jungle. Information isolation, like NXIVM members who were told not to Google. Social isolation, like Branch Davidians whose marriages were dissolved and whose outside relationships were discouraged. When you're cut off from other perspectives, the group's reality becomes your reality. It happens through commitment. Each investment makes the next one easier. You gave money, you'll give more money. You moved into the community, you'll follow the rules. You provided collateral, you'll accept the branding. The trap tightens with each step you take. It happens through authority, a leader who claims special knowledge, divine revelation, unique insight, a leader whose word cannot be questioned. Once you accept that authority, once you believe the leader sees things you can't, you stop thinking for yourself, and it could happen to almost anyone. Not because you're stupid, not because you're weak, but because you're human. We're social creatures. We seek belonging, we seek meaning, we seek purpose. And cults offer all of that. The techniques they use exploit normal psychology. The same principles that make society function, reciprocity, consistency, authority, social proof, can be weaponized. Under the right circumstances, with the right approach, most of us are vulnerable. So what protects you? Awareness, understanding how influence works, recognizing the warning signs, maintaining connections outside any single group, being skeptical of anyone who claims to have all the answers, being willing to question even when questioning is uncomfortable. The people who died at Jonestown weren't crazy. The women who were branded in NXIVM weren't stupid. The branch Davidians who burned at Waco weren't monsters. They were people, like you, like me, people who wanted something meaningful and found something monstrous. Thank you for staying with me through all of this. It's been heavy material, strange and disturbing, but important to understand, because cults haven't disappeared. They've evolved. They're on the internet now, in self-improvement seminars, in online communities, in political movements. The techniques are the same, only the packaging changes. Let your eyes close if they haven't already. Let your breathing slow down. Let the weight of these stories lift from you. You're safe. You're comfortable. You're exactly where you need to be. The world outside can wait until morning. For now, just rest, sleep well. This has been Late Night Psychology. Until next time.